Welcome to the third week of our message series that we have called Cornerstone. And if you've missed the first 2 weeks, we invite you to please go to our messages on our website. This series is centered around the bedrocks of our faith and what has brought our parish, to the point where we find ourselves today. We are where we are because we are a community of people who have committed to love this parish. 7 years ago, when we decided to set out in a deliberately different direction, we wanted to build on the strengths that we already had at Holy Eucharist and create a fresh, dynamic approach to sharing our faith with our community and those seeking a relationship with Jesus. We wanted a church that strives to fulfill the mission of Christ by reaching people where they are. That became our vision, to serve our mission, to follow Christ, love all, and grow disciples. While the mission of the church never changes, the methods and strategies that serve the mission can, and sometimes should and must. We loved our church and the vision that God gave us. And despite the obstacles we encountered, we remained faithful to that vision, and that faithfulness was fruitful. We are here today because we have been fruitful. This is fruit of love. This morning we are looking at another something you've probably never heard of before, but something foundational and fundamental to the life of the church. And to do it as we did last week, we're looking at a parable of Jesus, these stories he told with lessons to instruct his followers. As we heard, an owner of the vineyard had work that needs to be done. And he goes to the marketplace where day laborers would congregate at the beginning of the day. A few hours later, the owner goes out again and finds idle people, and again at noon and 3, and does likewise. And then he goes out again at the 5 o'clock hour, when there is only about an hour left before quitting time, and he discovers that there's still more idle people whom he invites to labor in his vineyard, which doesn't seem to make much sense at face value. So what we hear in the story is the people who came at the end of the day received the same compensation as those who worked the whole of the day. Those later thought because they worked all day that they would get more, but instead they get paid the same as everyone else who bore the day's burden in the heat. This seems like a very valid point. You would think that they would get more since they labored longer and accomplished more in the vineyard for the vineyard owner. Certainly when you think about it, you and I would never do this. We would never do this in our own businesses or in any of our organizations. If we pay those who worked longer the same as those who worked less hours, everyone certainly would probably start working less. But Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about God's kingdom and God's economy and not our economy. Apparently, God's economy is different from ours. The problem is that they are looking at the situation from their perspective and not the owner's. They feel ill-treated because they're looking only at their situation. But they've forgotten one simple fact, which is the owner is quick to remind them about. He held up his end of the bargain. He promised to pay them a day's pay for a day's work. They had forgotten one little fact. The money was his. He reframes the real problem. The real problem isn't his generosity. The real problem was their perspective. The money was his. Like last week's parable, this parable is about grace. Grace, as we said, isn't fair. And that's only a problem when we don't get what we think we deserve or want more than we got. We don't complain when grace works in our favor. Jesus doesn't have the 5 o'clock workers complain that they got too much for so little work. Why not? Because it is unrealistic. That would never happen. The parable teaches us of the graciousness and generosity of God, who is represented by the landowner. God is a giver who gives lavishly. He invites all his followers to display the same generosity. The parable also teaches something else about God. God is looking for more and more people to get to work in his vineyard, to get to work building the kingdom of God. The owner goes out at dawn, at noon, at 3, and even at the last hour, looking for the people to get on board with his work. God is gathering a growing movement of people who are about doing something, building something. And it's never too late to get involved. Earlier in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus discloses his plan to the apostles. As we hear in the Scriptures, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. He tells the apostles that he will build his church. We often think of buildings when we hear the word church. But Jesus never built a building. And if that's what he wanted his followers to be about, he would have said he was going to build temples or even synagogues. But the word in Matthew's Gospel was a very curious choice in the original Greek, the word Ecclasia. It's a word that doesn't even appear in the Scriptures until Jesus uses it here. The apostles wouldn't have even known what he was talking about. That Greek word was not used to describe a religious setting or gathering. It wasn't a religious word at all. It refers to assemblies or gatherings of people in a given locale for some specific purpose, usually a civic or community-wide one. And here's the key: for some specific purpose that impacted not just the people gathered in the assembly, for some specific purpose that impacted not just the congregation, but for some purpose that impacted the larger community. When Jesus launched the church, he launched a movement. The building project we joined him in is not simply initially, necessarily, or primarily the construction of a building. It's not the construction of buildings or the maintenance of a museum. It's not a monument to be viewed or a destination to be visited. It's a movement. It's a movement. So you know what that means? It's got to move. A growing movement, so it's got to grow. A growing movement of growing disciples who are gathering more people who are not disciples to become disciples. It's a movement that is building the kingdom of God. What's that? The kingdom of God is the place where God rules people's heads and hearts. It is a place where they allow God to have control over their family, their finances, their future, their career, their recreation, and increasingly over every and all areas of their lives. The movement is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. The work of God's kingdom is connecting people to that purpose. To be a part of the movement means to reorient our life around the person of Jesus Christ. It is a movement to be Jesus' witnesses, not only where we live, but to the ends of the earth. And it is a mission that is expansive and has no room for permanent spectators or selfish consumers. It has no room for people sitting idle and not getting to work. One way to get to work right now is to join a small group. And yes, they are back. We believe at Holy Eucharist that small groups have an impact on our discipleship journey. It's a setting that helps us to reflect on our faith, encourages us to see where we need to grow, and supports us in that growth through connecting with others on the journey. When we grow as disciples, we are better equipped to grow the church and to be part of her movement. Our opportunity we have in building the kingdom of God as disciples is significant. Think about it. The church is the only organization that gathers together all sectors of society on a regular basis, a weekly basis, for a meaningful purpose. Previous to the pandemic, you would gather, not me, but you would gather as Eagles fans. Finally, you got it. For the purpose of entertainment, which is certainly fine. But 70,000 people gathering together to watch a game doesn't change the world, no matter who wins. But as the church, we gather people together from all walks of life to join the movement of the kingdom of heaven in our community. And it's never too late to join. Movements happen when they are embraced by the hearts of people who follow them. Movements happen when individuals willingly and passionately move in concert with one another. That is why it is so vital to gather each week at Mass. It is also why we gather in small groups. Small groups are where the big church gets small. We are gathering together so that we can move in concert with one another to impact our community and our world. The point of gathering here is not to relieve our guilt or avoid hell or enjoy a break from the rest of life or even for the simple benefit of your family. We gather together to change and transform our lives so that increasingly we can change and transform our community and our world to reflect the kingdom of God. That is the Ecclasia. Let's be that church.